why don't we have flying cars, although we've had the technological ability to build them, since the 1930s? And the answer is,
Hi everyone. Today I'm with Dr. J. Storrs Hall. He's a well-known writer in nanotechnology, AI, machine ethics, and future technologies. He was the founding chief scientist of NanoRex and served as president of the Foresight Institute. Thank you for coming. So I want to start a little bit with what's going on in terms of growth in technology. We hear a lot about AGI and how things are evolving really, really fast. But the truth of the matter is that that may not be true, right? Maybe that, just computing is growing and the world of atoms is not evolving as much. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that compares to the Industrial Revolution growth?
well, actually, we should have been kicking into a mode where the physical technology was advancing on a rate that began to approach the rate at which information technology has been advancing over the past 40, 50 years. Um, because it was back in 1960 that Feynman gave us the notion of nanotechnology and a way to get there that he had trouble getting people to understand. He had these two famous prizes for $1,000 for a small motor and small writing, and they were both won, but they didn't go anywhere the way he had hoped to get something started. But if it had actually gotten started and followed the sort of track that he envisioned, and that Drexler himself later envisioned in the 70s and 80s, we would be on the same track for physical technology the way that we have been for um, information technology. And in fact, the guys who uh, worked out the fact that building chips with smaller and smaller features would make them faster and faster, as well as being able to build more complicated machines, um, were in part inspired by Feynman's "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom" speech. Um, so the um, the thing is that we have a clear path to a technology that would be advancing almost as fast in physical stuff as our uh, technology has in informational technologies and processing and communications and that kind of thing. The the one thing that physical technology needs that uh, computing doesn't need nearly as much is energy. And in the case of energy, we had not only a lack of understanding and a lack of progress, we had an active backlash against energy. Um, that includes fossil fuels, but particularly we had a huge backlash against nuclear energy, which is really going to have been our next major energy source. And um, if we hadn't had those huge setbacks, we probably would have, between 5 and 10 times as much energy per person to use for anything we wanted to do now, and the machinery to turn that into useful machines and actual effects and improving the quality of our lives.
Interesting. There are two emerging questions from what you said. One, I want to dive into one first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about energy. So, regarding nanotechnology, right, I was thinking a little bit more about it, and you're talking about computing and whatnot. And it seems that there is a strong incentive, for uh, silicon makers. So that means TSMC or, like companies that make chips to actually go into, producing things in the nanoscale, right? Because maybe we definitely want to increase computational power. Do you think that can be a path towards improving nanotechnology overall? And is that a path that we see there, or can there be other paths?
Yes, both. I think actually one of the, if you take any industry that is A, very important and makes a lot of money, and B, operates at ranges going down towards the nanoscale and could obviously be improved by being able to operate with atomic accuracy at the nanoscale, then you have something that is very likely to at least influence the development of new techniques and so forth. Now, right now, the techniques that they use in chip manufacture, for example, are extremely uh, specific to that because you kind of have to be specific to a given technological goal if you're going to push the technology as far as you can. So they're not really general stuff. They don't make machines, um, but they're getting closer and closer to being able to make atomically precise stuff. And once you can, you have a valuable input to the process of mechanical nanotechnology. Um, so I think the answer to that is a qualified yes.
Interesting. Just for the viewers, what does it mean to build nanotech technology? Does it mean to like basically build machines in the atom scale, or like can you describe a little bit more about how that future looks like?
Well, my favorite example is actually something out of cellular biology. Um, we have in our cells part of the process of digesting food and creating energy for our cells to use, for growth and for just muscles to work. Um, a little gadget that is powered by an electric motor that takes um, an adenosine diphosphate and tacks another phosphate group on it to make uh, adenosine triphosphate (ATP), which is what powers all of your cells. And it's a mechanical device. Now, it's kind of funky looking, floppy, and it looks like a bush. But the fact is that there's an identifiable electric motor in there, and there's an identifiable rotating machinery that causes a chemical transformation to happen by the use of physical force at that scale. So suppose you could take that and do it using mechanical engineering of the kind that we know how to do. You could do it about a million times as fast as happens in the cell. Um, so you start with that example and you say, suppose we could do everything else the same way. Then, the process of life would be more or less obsolete. Um, and we could do almost anything that, I mean, we're used to life being able to do everything, like feed us, um, and, uh, and actually, consist of what we actually are and do. But um, the example that I have in the book, which was just a fun little thing that happened to me while I was doing nanotech, was that I was sitting down with um, Rob Freitas, and we were trying to figure out how long it would take if we really did have a mature nanotechnology. How long would it take us to replace the capital stock of the United States? Um, and we sat down and we figured. And by that we meant, replace every single machine, every car, every truck, every building, every ship, every railroad, every structure. And how long do we think it was going to take us to do that if we had the productive power of a mature nanotechnology? We both said 1 week. Now that is what you're looking at. Okay, this is the capability that we should have and that we don't.
Interesting. So going like another question came up when you mentioned, how our cells work and how we process energy and things like that. Um, the idea of like biotechnology and how we are closer to figuring out what kind of DNA structures generate what kind of proteins and things like that. Can that also lead us to a path where we can actually produce like machines at the atomic scale or like at a smaller scale? Can that help us towards that goal?
Oh yeah, that's actually the path that Drexler wanted. He was uh, he became quite enamored of and impressed by the advances in molecular biology in the 70s and 80s. And so he said, look, if you were to just push this towards the kind of technology we know how to build, you ought to get something really good. And basically early in the next century, i.e., this century. Um, and he he began to work on that as his preferred pathway towards nanotechnology. Now, of course, Feynman had come along and said, we can do this with our machines. We just make smaller machines with our existing machines, and we use those to make even smaller machines and so forth until you get down to the atomic scale, and then, Bob's your uncle. Well, the only thing I really have to say about it is why not just do both? Um, and you do the top-down way from Feynman, and you do the bottom-up way from Drexler, and you meet in the middle, and you get there twice as fast because you've gone both halves at the same time.
Interesting. So it seems that the argument that some people have, that includes Peter Thiel and some other thinkers, is that we've experienced a stagnation of progress. So like since the 70s, we haven't seen that much progress in the world of atoms, and the beats have seen a lot of progress. Main characterization of that is like, where's my flying car, right? Like when we think about the
Yes,
Jetsons,
exactly. Right.
when we think about the Jetsons, like there is this idea of the flying car, right? One of the graphs that really grabbed me is basically energy production, right? It seems that per capita we haven't increased as much energy production, and I think you talk a little bit about the Adams curve, right? That
Right.
the
Henry Adams curve.
yeah, exactly. One of the counter arguments to that is that, okay, look, we're getting more efficient, right? So like if we use like the cars are doing more miles per gallon and things like that. Well, cars are one example, right? Is it
No, they are
true?
not. No, they are not. Okay. And the
Uh-huh.
reason they are not is that engines, heat engines, steam engines, and then gasoline engines and so forth have been getting more efficient for the entire time for the past 300 years that we have had any kind of heat engines. And they have been getting more efficient faster than they are now. Okay, the whole history of mechanical engineering and engine building has had a large component of increasing efficiency in the engines. And the efficiency that we have now is not increasing as fast as it was back when James Watt was building steam engines.
Hmm.
So that's not a valid argument for the fact that we have stagnated.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the facts is that okay, like looking at the Adams curve, we stagnated, right? But like, is that preventing technological progress? I think one of the things that you talk about, is about flying cars, right? Like, is energy like production preventing some of breakthroughs that we would have otherwise?
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, one of the things about energy is that it is a key part of any industrial mechanical process. And the the fact is that when you suddenly have to start conserving energy, what you basically have to do is start doing less things. And over the course of the Industrial Revolution from 1700 to 1970, um, we did more and more things. We got better, and we actually did more things. Like, for example, I'll give you a very good example. This coming month is going to be the last time any person stepped on the moon. 50 years ago, right? 50 years ago was the last time somebody stepped on the moon, starting in basically 1 month from now. So, um, and NASA's big thing is that they finally got around to launching another rocket, which I kid you not, cost as much as the entire original moon project.
Oh,
and
wow.
they've only finally got it launched, and it doesn't have any people on it. Um, okay, we have completely lost the ability to put people on the moon, and they're trying, and they hope, and frankly, I hope too, that they're going to be able uh, to do that again and recapture this lost capability. But there's no argument whatsoever that it is a lost capability. It's just something we used to do and that we can't do now. Um, so uh, what instead of losing things and then going back and spending a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to reclaim them, what we should have been doing is keeping them up and doing more things and so forth. I mean, we should be rebuilding our cities and building them better and smarter. We should be rebuilding our entire transportation infrastructure. Um, we should have flying cars. We should have cities in space. We should have cities on the sea. Um, and those are just the big things. I mean, I should have a robot housemaid, right? Um, everything in the Jetsons, it was a cartoon and it was intended to be a takeoff. But the fact is that most of the stuff that you see in the Jetsons should actually be here. And now the fact is the Jetsons is really set another 50 years in the future, in 2062. But it gives you some idea. I mean, basically just a way of looking and saying, ha ha, the Jetsons, but at least it gives you some idea of what it might be like if we had not stagnated.
Interesting. So, sorry to pin out this argument or this point, but I think it's
No, no,
important
keep going, keep going. No, this
to
is this is interesting and important.
I think I want to pin out and go against all the different counter arguments of it. So one of the counter arguments, like, oh, okay, uh, maybe it's not true that energy is like one of the requirements or one of the impeding forces of technology development. So like, can we go a little bit more on how does energy prices and production prevent the development of flying cars? Is that preventing us from having flying cars?
Oh, flying cars in particular, um,
Yeah.
but lots of things. Let me start with a much more mundane example. Um, Yesterday, I had a guy come in to look at my furnace. And the problem that we were having with the furnace was that the furnace was dripping. And you say, why is a furnace dripping? And it turns out that in modern furnaces, simply to get the most possible energy out of the combustion process, there is a condenser where the part of the products of combustion that comes off of the flame that is steam, i.e., water in a gaseous state, you can reclaim energy from that by condensing it, making water out of it, and then and that's more heat for you that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't condensed the water portion of your effluent stream. Okay, so modern furnaces, because they need to be as energy efficient as possible, have a condenser in them, and the condenser is extra stuff, and so it makes everything cost more, and it can go wrong because you have to get rid of the water somehow. You have to have a pipe going down into a drain at least, and the people who had installed my furnace actually didn't quite tighten the coupling on the pipe, and so it was dripping, um, and so it required extra maintenance, and that's happened to everything. Every single thing we do is more complicated and more expensive simply because we're trying to make it more energy efficient. And if energy was cheap, we wouldn't have to do that. And everything else would be cheap. Okay. And you wouldn't have to put as much work into it and you wouldn't have to fix it as often and so forth. Now, back to flying cars is like an airplane. An airplane needs a bigger, more powerful engine than a car that's on the ground. If you're going to make your flying car take off vertically, i.e., from your driveway and land in someone else's driveway, rather than go to an airport, convert into an airplane, fly off, land on some other airport, turn around, fold the thing back up, and drive off to where you're going, then it's going to have to be it's going to have much more powerful thrusters than just the little propeller that you have on an airplane. And I mean, technically, there's a lift weight ratio that you have to have more lift than you have weight, but the thrust that creates that lift in an airplane with wings is only about 1/10 of the weight of the airplane. Okay, that you have a nice standard, more or less usual ratio there for 1/10 of the way the airplane is enough to keep it in the air as far as the thrust of the propeller. But if you're going to take off vertically, you have to have the whole weight of the airplane. Okay, you can't just have 1/10 of it
Yeah.
and rely on the wings. So you have to have 10 times as much thrust in your VTOL, even if all it does is get you up to 50 feet, so you can accelerate off over the treetops. Well, that means you have to be able to handle 10 times as much power. Okay, and so and hopefully only for that part of the flight and for the landing, but still, um, you have to have that much engine and that much power availability, whether it's batteries or fuel or what have you. And so, flying car is a really key um, example of the fact that if you have more energy available, it's easier to do things. Because making a flying car that doesn't use any more energy than a regular car is basically impossible. It really is. So, and the other thing is that if you go through the book, probably one of the most overlooked, but I think most important parts of the book, as far as flying cars are concerned, is the economic analysis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, why don't we have flying cars, although we've had the technological ability to build them, since the 1930s? And the answer is they cost a lot to build, and a bunch of other things. You have the regulation, and you have the fact that everybody needs to be a licensed pilot and all this sort of stuff. Well, that's not actually as hard as it sounds, but the um, uh, the thing is that you need to have a gadget, your flying car, that is as valuable as the money you're going to pay for it. Okay, so let's design a flying car, and then let's look at how much it would cost to build, and then let's look at how valuable it would be in terms of, as well as we can guess, how much you'd be willing to pay for it because of its value to you. Well, it turns out that you can, at least to some extent, try and work that out in terms of the expressed um, preferences of people who are actually driving, and how likely they are to go a certain distance, given that it costs them such and such amount of time. And a flying car that would actually uh, go at roughly airliner speeds um, and take off from your driveway and land on the other guy's driveway, so that there was no latency and time wasting and so forth in the trip. Turns out to be about 7 times as valuable as a car.
Mhm.
Okay,
How is
and
that
so
calculated?
um, well, it's a little complex. You might want to just read the chapter in the book,
Mm-hmm.
but and there's a whole bunch of graphs, and I tried to do all graphs and no equations because you lose readership when you put equations in a popular
Yeah.
book. But uh, basically, what you can do is you can look at actual um, travel patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and from that you can deduce just how valuable it is for people to spend the time to go somewhere, and you sort those somewheres by the distance, and you wind up. It turns out that the flying car is going to be most valuable for you to go to places that would take you too long to go in a day in an automobile. Okay, so but with your car, you can have two houses, and if they're 100 miles apart, you can go back and forth between them without wasting an entire day. With a flying car, you can have a house New York and one in Florida and do the same. Okay, so you've vastly expanded the amounts of places that you could live, places that you could work, the places you could go out to eat, the places you could do anything else that of the sort that you drive to anyway. Um, and that's how you can sort of backfill the numbers and calculate. Um, and I'm sure there was some uh, economist out there who would say, "Oh, well, you forgot this." Well, and all I can say to this economist is, "Well, go ahead and do it." I mean, we need more of this. We need more analysis of stuff like this. Um, but yes, the fact is that that was the first published analysis of the value of a flying car that I know of was in my book.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like this economic analysis because I view a lot of the world through economics and incentives in that way. One of the things I think it's important to think about, is that people travel uh, like just a limited amount of time, right? Like it's an hour per day of travel
Right? Yes,
distance,
exactly.
and 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 then like with a flying car maybe you can have cover a bigger amount of mileage. Another thing that I was thinking about it when I was thinking about it is it's like for air travel I think most of the cost is fuel, right? And if you reduce the amount of fuel, the price of air travel, even like commercial air travel, if let's say you don't own a plane, right, that would reduce a lot, and I think people would travel much more frequently. Another interesting thing that I was thinking about is like supersonics, right? We don't have Concords anymore, but there are companies innovating there. There's a company called Boom, and it seems that a lot of the cost is associated, with the fuel, because you will need whatever 3 times more energy to travel above the speed of the sound, and that's like definitely a limiting factor. Like prices are definitely a limiting factor. But going back to energy, what happened, right? Like we had the nuclear. It seems that there's a war against fossil fuels. Can we dive in a little bit more into like what happened to nuclear power, and what can we have in the future instead?
Well, there was kind of a movement where people got to signal their virtue by being against stuff, and in particular, anything that appeared to be important and powerful, but particularly powerful. And the so this was in the 60s, the flower children and all that sort of stuff, where um, if it was natural, it was good, and if it was artificial, it was bad. And energy and big, powerful machines were obviously artificial. And that was kind of the basis of this. And um, so it became politically valuable in some places to be against nuclear power, even though, as you well know, in the interim, it's turned out to be by far the safest form of power generation that we have. Um, and so the there was a sort of a social bias against it simply due to this flower children thing. And then what happened was that after uh, the media had a holiday making big scare stories about 3 Mile Island, um, they, after the um, after the fact of the accident there, um, it turns out that people did surveys of Americans and found that they had been so misled by the propaganda of the anti-nuclear crowd that everybody believed that a nuclear plant could blow up like a supergiant atomic bomb, and they were even referred to by the same word, nukes. And so unfortunately, in the public mind, uh, the political uh, propagandists and activists and entrepreneurs, essentially, people who set out to make money by telling people the wrong things about stuff. Um, had managed to succeed so well that the vast majority of our population simply didn't understand enough about this technology to make anything vaguely like a competent, informed decision. And so, what happened as a result of that and all the bad publicity it got was that um, the NRC got essentially anti-nuclear activists in the important positions of the commission and sat on nuclear power, not allowing anyone to uh, license or build a new design reactor for 50 years. Um, and that's what happened. It basically, in this particular case, uh, it was regulation, but it was regulation on top of a really bad social underpinning that allowed it to happen that way. So,
Interesting.
I mean,
So
here we sit. We're desperate for carbon-free energy. We're desperate for clean energy. Desperate for safe energy, and yet um, the best technology we have has not only been stopped, but it's been kept from being improved for 50 years. Imagine that the same thing had been happening to computers. And so we're finally getting to the point where people are saying, well, we actually need computers after all, even though they've been illegal for 50 years. Let's go dig out the um, computer designs of the 1970s and start building them again. And they're all using discrete transistors. Okay, that's what nuclear is like now. We've blown 50 whole years of possible improvement in nuclear.
Mhm. Yeah, that's crazy to think about. I've heard some theories saying that, part of the problem was actually the nuclear energy companies and not the manufacturers of, the power plants, because a lot of the money that goes into it is, is for, like, making it safe, quote unquote. But I'm also seeing like some new developments in fission and fusion, right? So in fission, I'm seeing like small modular reactors, and that can actually reduce a ton the cost of each reactor, which I think it could, maybe initiate a new era of development. And there's also nuclear fusion, where you have in Cambridge, like MIT group developing like a small nuclear fusion reactor. What's your view on on these two different approaches, and like, is there a path forward where we can see either one of them? And is another question related to that, have you ever thought about the pricing, because like nuclear fission right now it's more expensive, I would say, than other source of power, and I guess that's related to a lot to regulation, right? Like, uh, is there one that's gonna be cheaper in the long run? Like, where should we think about the future?
Well, you can't necessarily say, but I think that small modular reactors are actually a very good uh, bet. I think we should be pouring money into those and understanding how to build them and not building every reactor as a whole new thing with a whole new design and spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars simply on the paperwork to get it certificated. All right. So that's the first thing. Um, Second thing is, I think fusion is a wonderful thing, and I think it should be studied like crazy. And I'm really happy, and I will be ecstatic if the spark reactor that you were talking about actually works. Um, but I don't expect to see power from it for at least another decade. Um, Whereas reactors, we could be well the very first reactor when they didn't even know how to build a reactor and they were just shooting in the dark during World War II, a Hanford B full-scale reactor that they used to breed plutonium for the atom bomb was built in less than a year from stem to stern. Okay, that's how fast we could be building reactors, but we aren't. Um, so and this was the very first one. Okay, there was no um, uh, experience. That everything was purely theoretical. That they got a few things wrong, but they were such good engineers that they built it in such a way that it worked anyhow. Um, and so that's the sort of thing that we could be doing. And you know, nearly 70 years after the first reactor, that we absolutely should be doing. And furthermore, we should be doing it and getting better at it and getting more experience and getting and being able to build reactors more and more cheaply and using less material and being safer and everything else that happens when you actually practice a technology over the years. Um, so so I think I have a big yes for the fission reactors and a small yes for the fusion. Um, I think fusion is trickier than people think it is. Um, but it's the sort of thing I would love to be working on just because it's such a really cool technical problem. And and so far, people have been actually um, solving the problems that they come up with and making progress. And um, so I say more power to them and let them keep going.
Interesting. Another thing that I'm seeing is that it seems, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there. It seems that solar energy, which is basically taking uh, fusion power from the sun, which doesn't produce per mile, like doesn't produce that much energy, but because it's so big, it produces a lot of energy, and we can take that energy with solar and maybe wind or whatever. It seems that the price of production of these technologies is going down exponentially, and at the same time battery prices are also going down. So we're starting to see the density and the price of this like lithium ion batteries, and maybe there will be new advances there, get much cheaper over time. Could that be one of the areas where like we see in the next 10 years energy production and storage get cheaper, or is that a mirage? Is that an illusion?
I think actually the key here, and I sound like I'm harking back to something we were talking about before, but it's very important, is nanotechnology. If we
Hmm.
get to a competent nanotechnology, not only will we have the ability to build uh, objects that essentially harvest the thin diffuse energy from natural sources like the sun and the wind and so forth and other things, um, geothermal, for example.
Yeah.
Um, the but that takes a high technology, so you have to have a high technology, and you're not going to get before 2050, I think, and you're not going to get much higher than nanotechnology once we actually get it. Um, and the other thing is you have to be productive. You have to have a productive technology that can build all this stuff without wasting all your money and having it, um, get out there. I mean, all of the energy harvesting schemes like the solar and the wind are necessarily exposed to the weather. Um, and so those things don't last as long as they do in a carefully constructed, shielded powerhouse where um, you can control the environment that your machines are living in. Um, the other thing is that um, nanotechnology can not only build more stuff, it can build better stuff. So instead of having to have these semiconducting uh, plates that are the solar cells for your solar system, you can build stuff that is essentially Yagi antennas for optics and associated rectifiers, and you get a much higher uh, efficiency in conversion of the sunlight, which is a good thing. But um, the flip side of that is put the damn thing out in space, and build it out there, and you get much stronger sunlight, and it's there all the time, and then you just transmit it back to Earth, and we know how to do that. We've been doing it since the 50s, um, and so as far as a major power source that comes from directly from natural sources like the sun, I think space solar power is the one that's actually going to work in the long run. I mean, in the short run, yeah, you can run out and you put solar cells on your roof, um, and you get power tomorrow. But for powering an entire industrial civilization, you need something that has open limits, and I mean, at the distance from the sun that the Earth is, there is 10 billion times as much energy available in a sphere around the sun at our distance than we actually get on the planet. Okay, that's 10 billion. That's the difference between two stages of um, uh, civilization. You have um, uh, so much more energy available. Remember, there's only 8 billion of us here on the Earth. So
Hmm.
you'll have the entire Earth's amount of energy per person if you go out and get that solar energy.
Oh, wow. Interesting. One, I think one of the factors, as you mentioned, it was like maybe the counterculture and how people view nuclear power. I see that at least that's my feeling, and maybe I'm wrong there, is that, social media allows uh, the people to basically fight back a little bit. And so, like, I see much more, like the Concorde, there was I imagine there was a bad view about it, but it seems that nuclear power, uh, people are shifting their views over time in America, which I think is the most important place to shift the view. But I think social media unlocks that. Another thing that I've been thinking about for a while is, how a little bit of the money structure is corrupt. I'm like a bit Bitcoin guy. I love crypto in general, but Bitcoin specifically. And it seems that there were a lot of incentives in America that like a lot of bad incentives that kind of destroy innovation. So one of the things that manufacturing had to go away because the U.S. is exporting dollars and things like that, but also how the government has no guardrails on spending, and like how these big tech companies keep growing and growing, and you don't see as much innovation maybe with other companies. They don't have as much competition because they can just buy out other companies and issue that at basically 0% interest rates. How do you see the influence of like these big tech companies and maybe even academia? I think academia got corrupted over time as well because of this big money. Do you see that trend, or is it like maybe I'm wrong there? And if I am, I would like to be corrected there. But yeah.
Well, I think actually you put your finger on a very general problem, which is, it's not just the government, it's not just the big tech, and it's not just academia, but any structure consisting of people that doesn't have really strong negative feedback is going to go off the rails. That's just the way it works. And so the only place that we have um, a a feedback mechanism that's strong enough to actually make a big difference to groups of people who are doing things is in the marketplace, in particular in a very competitive marketplace. So if you have something that is not in a competitive marketplace, um, academia, for example, um, you get the phenomenon that you're talking about. Um, as to what you can do about it, the first and most important things is to change the system so that um, the institutions that you care about and the ones that we're hoping are going to uh, continue to make the world a better place for us do in fact get the kind of feedback that they need, so that the people won't start just changing things to suit themselves. And of course, the very first thing that anybody in an organization will do is change the rules so that they don't get feedback, because nobody likes being told they're doing something wrong and that they have to do something else. But they have to be, because nobody is perfect, and they will always do that. So that's the first thing we have to do. It's not easy. In fact, I couldn't even tell you how to do it, but I know that that's the most important thing. Now, as to the specifics of some of that stuff. Um, I haven't really followed crypto as strongly as I might have because I've been interested more in energy and flying cars and all that sort of stuff. Um, and so I couldn't really tell you anything where I would know more than the average man on the street as far as that's concerned. Um, I do think that academia um, could stand to uh, take a few whacks and straighten up and fly right in many ways. Um, but again, uh, that's that's something that will either happen or not. And if it doesn't happen, academia has been taking lots of licks recently, not only from the pandemic, but the fact that people are beginning to say, well, you go in to get a degree and it didn't do you any good. You're still out there pumping gas or something. Um, so ultimately, it will either um, fix itself or collapse under its own weight. Um, and I don't really know which. It's probably going to be a combination of the two. But I'm not either particularly um, optimistic or pessimistic about it. I think people muddle through in general, and this is the sort of thing that you can expect in the areas that you've been talking about.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I'm generally an optimistic person. So for me, it seems that there are a bunch of forces towards, getting the great stagnation basically away. And, we'll see a lot of progress in the next few years. And I think the reason for that, it's like social media. I think it's one big thing. So people have more of a voice. I think Bitcoin and crypto will make, these big governments have to basically have some accountability, and that will basically also cause, big tech for to have some accountability, also academia and whatnot. I think we're seeing this year and the past year and probably the next year where we're going to probably see a recession, like a very strong recession. Um, we will see how like what the world would look like when like you actually have money that people need to think about ways of spending money, and so you have that negative feedback, which I think is important. But I think after after that year, things the government will start printing money again, and we'll see maybe for 5-10 years again this craziness, and but eventually things will crash, and or this bubble will deflate, and eventually we'll get things to normal again. But it seems that we've been in like sort of a bubble like scenario in the past 50 years, and the consequences of that are like the big stagnation that people talk about. But that's just sort of theory that I
Yeah.
have.
Well,
Uh,
there's two things I've learned in my life. One is that I'm actually fairly decent at predicting technology, and the
uh-huh.
other one is that I'm really terrible at predicting economics. So,
Uh-huh. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll figure that out later on in my life. But yeah,
I hope so.
but one of the things that I think you talk about is like, and I think you were one of the first people to talk about AI ethics. Um, um,
Yes.
one of my concerns, is that there could be overregulation there, and one area that we're starting to see so much good development there with like media creation, digital media. People can create images, and we'll start to see videos created, by these AI tools, and it can help with text and things like that. Is that AI is basically a lever that's helping a ton, but at the same time there could be overregulation there, and I think that also happens, with crypto markets and things like that. Um, could we get into a scenario where like the government is basically overstepping the same way it overstepped with nuclear and maybe aviation as well, right?
Yeah, well, definitely we could get into one like aviation. I mean, people are just so keen on being safe when they get into an airplane, and it's like the big powerful nuclear machines. The places where this happens the most are the places that feel dangerous, where somebody who's telling a story can tell a story about the nuclear weapon blowing up a city, and then turn around and point at a reactor and let people think that they're the same thing. Well, the same thing with not to quite as strong an extent, but yeah, ever since 1930s, we've had movies where robots take over the world. I mean, the play in which the word robot was invented was about robots killing off all of humanity. Um, RUR. So the background is definitely there, at least in the popular mind, but I don't think it's anywhere near as strong as it was with nuclear. Um, so it's probably, if it does happen at all, um, it's probably going to be more like uh, the FAA than the NRC. Um, and I'm not really sure. I mean, I wrote a book about this, over 10 years ago because I thought it was something important to talk about. And there's just sprung up a whole bunch of people in academia mostly talking about it and getting together and having all these conferences and thinking they're so important to the future of the world because if they don't talk about AI risks, then the machines are going to go and kill everybody. Well, I think there's a lot of that's simply people liking to think of themselves as being important. Um, and so there is something deep, profound, interesting, and important to do there. I'm not sure how much of it is actually getting done by the AI risks community. Um, I when I tackled the subject, um, what I looked at was the fact that um, the moral philosophers over the course of the 20th century had finally come to the realization that your ability to do ethics in your head, to decide what's right and what's wrong, and judge your own actions and all that sort of stuff, was very, very, very much like your ability to form language. It was fluid. It looked like there was a structure to it because you can write down rules for language, you can write down rules for morals, but in fact, when the rubber hits the road, um, uh, the people who tried to write down the rules for language as far back as the 1950s basically flat out failed. I mean, it's more complicated than you think it is when you sit down and you can write 1,000-page tomes about the structure of language, and you still can't write a program that does language right. Okay, so here come these learning machines, and they absorb huge amounts of text. I mean, gigantic, more text than you could possibly read in 100 lifetimes. These machines have absorbed, and they have a process that kind of internalizes them. The deep neural net learning uh, process that essentially builds a machine that if you set it up to produce something that's like the sort of thing that it's been trained on, it will keep going and it will produce more and more and 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 in the process reveal a lot of the accumulated knowledge that was present in the text that it quote studied unquote in the training process. Well, if what the moral philosophers have been telling us is true, then the ability to make moral decisions is just like that. We will never write down a set of specific, bureaucrat-like rules or laws or any other thing expressed in language that allows us to capture the essence of human morality. But if you study what humans do enough, and I don't know if there's a corpus, the way there are corpuses of language, that will allow you to do that in as direct a fashion. But basically, if you can get out there and watch people enough and apply some of the same kinds of processes that you did to absorb knowledge from the giant corpuses of language, then you might actually be able to build a machine that would have the same kind of ethical judgment that people do, at least to the same extent that we have machines that are able to write language the way people do. And
Inter-
that's something people ought to be thinking about.
Interesting. Yeah. I tend to think that it's more important, like I would like the people building it to actually think about it instead of some bureaucrat trying to put their thumb down in some industry, because usually the people involved in the industry have more like have thought more about the problem and have more nuance into it. Um, but yeah, I like one thing that George Hotz, the founder of Coma AI, which is this computer, or like this kind of cell phone like machine that you attach to your car and the car drives itself. He was asked about the trolley problem, right? When you have, in
Oh
one
yeah, right.
road,
Yes.
so like what would your car do? And he's like, oh, I have a simple answer. When the car faces that problem, it can ask the person to take the decision, and
Right.
then
Yes.
we
Exactly. Right.
then we have it solved, right? Which I think it's kind of interesting and smart as well, because a lot of I think technology is a lever, and a lot of it
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
can
you
be
you put
used.
your finger on something that's extremely important, and if I'm going to say that there's something that's going to be the really big thing in the next decade or two, as far as AI is concerned, it's going to be exactly what you were talking about in your joke, which is um, you have a machine that can handle most of the usual cases and does a good job at it, and yet it has to interact with a person who is going to be paying less attention than they were, because the machine is going to be doing all the work. And suddenly they're going to throw the problem in the human's lap, and the human is going to be able to is going to have to make a good decision suddenly under great pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work, and so you people studying that problem are that's going to be the really interesting thing about human robot relations over the next couple of decades. I think after the next couple of decades, the solution is simply going to be the robot does it all anyway. But in the interim, the that's going to be a big deal in terms of um, how much we allow robots to do and how much we force people to have to watch them and all that sort of stuff. Because we've already had people killed by people in self-driving cars, reading their mail instead of watching the screen and so forth the way they were supposed to.
Yeah, I mean the counter argument to that is that we have people kill people all the time
Mhm.
without self-driving cars, right? So like what matters is probably the numbers, like the quantity of accidents per mile per
Oh,
time,
I
you
agree
know?
with you there. I,
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
completely agree with that. But um, the the thing where the people are suddenly called on. I mean, remember the Brazil Airlines crash over the Atlantic where the stall warning went off and because of a frozen sensor, and the entire well-trained cockpit crew panicked, did the wrong thing, and crashed the airplane. I mean, that's the sort of thing that happens. Um, so that's this is the sort of thing that people would like to prevent. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people studying it and at least thinking about it.
Yeah, uh, uh, I had something on my train of thought that was related to basically money, AI. Oh my God. I can go back to that. So I think we talk about, technology and science basically, with like left foot and right foot. Like, is there anything in science that you see happening right now that will be, of interest of,
Hmm.
technology development in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I think actually we're on the technology foot right now. I think that as we develop AI and nanotechnology, we're going to gain the ability to learn a bunch of new science, especially at the molecular level, and be able to build new machines as the next step based on the understanding that we get from the technology that we're now currently able to build, including nanotechnology. So I think that essentially energy is going to be um, dependent on nanotech and nuclear. And right now we can build nuclear reactors that are these big honking things that you need a square mile to put them on, and you have to have them uh, encased in all sorts of um, structures that prevent even the tiniest bit of uh, nuclear material escaping and all this sort of thing. But ultimately, you need something that has the same power to weight ratio as the nuclear reactor, but it's small enough to put in your flying car or your spaceship or your city on Mars or anything like that. And so and that's going to re require us to learn a bit more new physics. And it's just the way I think and what I've seen when I've looked at it, but I think that there's new physics out there to learn. I don't think we know it all,
Oh yeah,
and I
100%.
think we
Yeah.
have I think we have some guesses as to what might be out there next. Um, and so I think we have plenty of headroom. Um, and so we just need to build the technology to do the experiments and start working on the fact that there's stuff in there that we don't understand. And
Interesting.
that's where I think we're going. I think we're firmly in a technology step right now. We need to just go ahead and finish it and get nanotech and the capabilities that it will give us to uh, actually do serious experiments with complete control of the structure of matter. Um, and then things like, for example, cold fusion. There, we still have no idea what's actually going on um, in those experiments. What we do have is uh, revisions and improvements and so forth to the point we know something is going on. Um, and so the but we still are really lacking in the basic science of it. So we need to be able to study matter with absolute detail uh, to all of the atoms and all of their positions relative to each other and anything that might be going on. And there's a lots of high-end um, quantum effects that we simply just don't think about because it's too complicated to calculate. And right now, one of the reasons it's too complicated to calculate is that all we know is, you put a piece of palladium with, some uh, tiny fraction of a percent of some impurity in it, and you heat it up, and something happens, and then, um, but you don't actually have any clue where all the individual atoms were
Hmm.
because it's a piece of stuff, and you treated it with a bulk technology. Once you start building those things atom by atom, so that you absolutely know where all the atoms are, exactly where each impurity atom is, and all this sort of stuff, you'll have a much better chance of figuring out what's actually going on in there. And that's just one possible path to new energy and new physics and uh, all the other stuff that we would like to know to lead us to the age of the Jetsons.
Interesting. Yeah. Now I remember what was my
Okay,
train of
go for
thought.
it.
So you mentioned, about going to the moon and things like that, and like we're like 50 years afterwards, we're like not achieving the same thing. I think there's an interesting post by Nick Szabo about one of the people that came up with BitGold before the Bitcoin solved the problem of the Byzantine generals problem. But one of the ideas that he talks about in one of his posts, which I think it's really really interesting, is how to explore new frontiers. So one of the things that about the exploration of the seas back in the day is that, for example, China had an empire, and the empire would send these huge boats to go to Africa to get, these huge animals, giraffes and things like that, to basically show how powerful they were. But the way that actually, the frontier was, but like, the emperor died, and it became out of fashion.
Yeah.
The way that we actually explored the frontier at the time was with these small boats, which they were like these companies that were looking for profiteering. They were looking for profits, and you had these really small boats that went, to actually make money out of it. And in compared to the space, we back in the day we had, this grandiose things where, we would send people into the space, but now it seems that we're now looking for making profits out of, this space race. So one of the things is through Starlink, which is, this space internet, and like SpaceX could become one of the biggest companies in the world, because one of the ways that we'll make more and more money is through internet. And I think maybe my optimistic side of things says, okay, look, we're actually now going to explore the frontier, explore the space, because there are now more and more companies, and there was some sort of incentive to reduce the costs with cores, and the government is now paying per weight that's sent to space, and so now companies have incentive to do that. So like what I've been thinking about, is how this central funding and how that's going to change in the near future, because the government eventually will not be able to print money, and so you won't have these corrupt institutions like academia and whatnot, and a lot of the research went to big tech, which still has a lot of money, and I think big tech is still a problem. But I think we'll see more innovation because you won't have these central institutions. But yeah, I wonder what you think about
Right. Well,
that.
I agree with you in a large extent. I think if SpaceX becomes extremely powerful and rich, it's mostly because people are going to discover something good to do in space in general, not just the internet. Um,
Yeah,
and it could be energy. I mean, who knows? It depends on a bunch of technology and a bunch of regulation and a bunch of other stuff. But um, you there are things that you can do in space that will ultimately, I think, wind up being the vast majority of all human activity. And hopefully we can preserve the Earth and make a nature park out of it and so forth before we completely pave over the rest of the universe. But the thing is that uh, there's a key question, and the key question is, what's the killer app? What's the one thing that gets you going?
yeah,
What is the spreadsheet for your PC?
yeah,
Um, what is the porn for the internet? I mean, what actually makes it go there?
yeah.
Um, that people didn't quite realize when they started doing it. Um, and you can ask us about a bunch of technologies that will obviously be hugely important in the future. And the interesting question for the near term is, what's the key? What's the one thing that gets you in there? And I think SpaceX has clearly figured that the internet is going to be one of the keys. I mean, it gives them a an economical way to launch a bunch of stuff, and they improve their they go down the learning curve, and they get better, and they uh, produce more stuff, and they make money from it. Um, Now, is there another one that's the next step on that ladder? And so that's really the thing to think about. I think if you can uh, say, okay, what's bigger than the internet in space, then you're getting close to figuring out what's actually going to happen next.
Yeah, interesting. Another thing that I've been thinking about, so Girard, who is like, this philosopher and whatnot, he talks a lot about mimesis and how, especially in zero-sum societies, we see a lot of conflict because people are fighting for the same thing. And I think that's what we're seeing in big cities right now, especially in the US, but elsewhere in the West, basically society, we are not seeing as much development as we could, and so there's a lot of conflict, within society. But I think a more bright future will be, of technology development and things like that. Um, I want to leave us, this is the last question. Like, how would this bright future look like? Like, what kind of things do you see, in the next 10, 20 years that would be really cool and, inspiring for people out there?
Well, I think as far as the guy in the street is robots. I think we're going to get smarter and smarter robots to the point they start doing a lot of stuff. AI, um, in the sense of drawing pictures and all the other cool stuff it's doing, um, is going to do the same thing for office work. Um, and so as far as affecting the way your life actually works, um, that's going to be it. And then probably the robots are going to start affecting the way construction is done, um, and we'll be able to have things like self-driving cars and self-flying airplanes and that kind of thing. Um, I don't really see the big uh, phase change coming in energy until we get nanotechnology. Once we get nanotechnology, then big stuff is going to happen. And I don't really know if that's going to happen this decade or next decade. Um, everybody who was really into nanotechnology back in the 80s thought it was going to happen in the 90s, or at least in the in the 20 aughts, and it didn't. Um, and part of the reason I wrote the book was just to kind of look back over it and say, okay, why didn't it? Um, and so there's a lot of basically that's kind of like my memoirs of the battle to get nanotechnology going, um, in the book. But um, once we do, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, the stagnation, we'll be able to sort of pick up and start going again with. Um, so the instead of having the lost 50 years since the 70s the way we do now, we could have that the progress we should have gotten between now and the next 70s. Um, and so I wouldn't say much about the next 2 decades because of the timing, but I think that we have a very optimistic view of the next 50 years if we really get down to the point of wanting it and deciding to do it. Because the upside is there. It's waiting for us.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you so much
Thank
for,
you. It's,
yeah,
it's
this
enjoyable to be on your show.